Lundbeck is an expert in neuroscience research and fully dedicated to improving treatment for people with brain diseases. Besides doing what we do best, continuing to improve and provide treatment, we will strive to build awareness and engage a wide range of stakeholders. We will help share knowledge across sectors, combat prejudice and stigmas associated with brain diseases, and help put focus on the sad fact that this is a growing burden for society, causing tremendous personal tragedies for millions and millions of people all over the world. This is why we need to build new hope and improve conditions for people living with brain disease. This is our passion.
Good evening to the physicians and allied healthcare professionals in attendance. I am Daniel Lau from Lundbeck Philippines, Inc., organizer of this online learning exchange forum, and I will be your host for this live webinar. To formally open tonight's learning session, allow me to introduce our moderator. Dr. Cheridin Oro Josef is a family medicine specialist, geriatric medicine specialist also. She graduated from University of Santo Tomas, BS Medical Technology, and Faculty of Medicine and Surgery. She's also the National Board of Trustee in Philippine Academy of Family Physicians, special lecturer in Ateneo School of Medicine and Public Health, a part-time faculty member of the Miriam College, College of Arts and Sciences, visiting senior consultant in Amang Rodriguez Memorial Medical Center, and also the chair in geriatric services. She's also an active consultant in several private hospitals in Marikina, a geriatric consultant in Camillus Medhaven, Jesuit Health and Wellness Center and Medical Missionary Sisters. She's the immediate past president of the Inner Wheel Club of Marikina, the founder of Above 60 Academy of Marikina, organizer of Teen Academy of Marikina, volunteer consultant in United Bayanihan Foundation, mother of two, and wife of a Rotarian. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me in welcoming Dr. Cherilyn Oro Jose. Good evening, Doctor.
Thank you very much, Sir Daniel. So good evening, a pleasant evening to everyone here, our colleagues. I'd like to welcome you all to this live webinar on promoting quality mental health across family life cycle, particularly that of the family with young children and adolescents. In these trying times, full of uncertainty, even as doctors, physicians are very vulnerable to anxiety and other mental health conditions. And as a mother of an 11-year-old daughter and a 15-year-old son, I was a witness to how my children had to cope with their online learning last year, full online, how they had to submit all the requirements, all in digital platform, and how it took its toll into their mental health. Recently, I just did not see a lot of surge in COVID, but I have seen a surge of 10 to 15-year-old patients coming into my clinic, parents complaining of their children having mental health concern. So tonight, we hope that we'll be able to tackle this topic and be able to arm us whenever we see patients suffering from this, not really suffering, having these mental health conditions. So now, before we begin the forum, I would like to direct your attention to the question box that you will find in your control panel. Please look for it now. And should you have questions during the course of the talk or the webinar, you may write them down and press submit so we can have our guest speakers answer them during the Q&A segment. So for now, please allow me to introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is a cum laude graduate of BS Psychology from the University of the Philippines, a graduate and scholarship grantee in Behavioral Science Family Systems Educator Fellowship, USFA in 2012. She is also a graduate of the scholarship grantee in Leadership in Mental Health American University in Cairo, WHO Egypt in 2019. She's also a graduate of the scholarship granted Leadership in Mental Health Human Rights Law, WHO India in 2020. Also a graduate of the Doctor of Communications, University of the Philippines from 2017 to 2020, a medical director and physician of God's Touch Family Clinic, Life Touch Medical Inspirational, 1991 up to current. Dr. Helen is also a medical specialist at the Department of Health from 2018 to 2019, a technical expert for the Center for Excellence in Primary Care, Regions 2, 8, and 7, European Union DOH Policy Bureau in 2018. She was chair of the Mental Health Committee and Life Fellow of the Philippine Academy of Family Physicians from 2018 until now. So, with that, please help me welcome our speaker on key development goals and principles of care for families with young children and adolescents. Please welcome Dr. Helen Santiago Sigua.
So welcome to the third part of our multi-series of webinars on family life cycle. And just to give you a brief background how we conceptualized having this series. When the pandemic came last year, and of course on the backdrop of the Philippine Mental Health Act being finally promulgated after 29 years, okay, and now we are navigating the IRR of our universal health care and the IRR of that act itself. We are now into concretizing how we can collaborate, care, task share, okay, really use models that we can apply so that the mental health can be taken care of in the level of primary care. So that's our trajectory. And when we gathered several experts and consultants from various spheres, they were all excited. No, we leveraged the DOH, the WHO, the Philippine Psychiatric Association, and of course our own Philippine Academy of Family Physicians. And we thank you. We are forever grateful for the support of Lundbeck Pharmaceuticals for making this realizable. And so after this, okay, we will go into the last series, which is another consolidated one, consolidating the launching years and the empty nest part. And then in October, we want to culminate it with during the World Mental Health Day, to culminate it, to wrap up everything. Okay, all the webinar lectures will be consolidated and integrated in one large forum. So that's very exciting. So now, next slide, please. Okay. So, okay, so we are tackling the family with young children, okay, and this involves not only after birth, but even highlighting the importance of taking care of the intrauterine phase, because it has implications to the development of the child after birth, no? And it's probably strategic also to juxtapose the two stages already, although voluminous, no, each ang discussion dapat, but then we found a way how we can discuss it na generalized principles and developmental goals para makita rin natin yung difference, no. And then, okay, next slide, please. So, actually, we want to focus, okay, not only trans-pandemic, not only the impact of the trauma. This is really a very traumatic experience, no? Globally, macroscopically and microscopically, trauma ito sa ating lahat. But we want that this is a time to learn, relearn and unlearn, no, things, so that we still come from the strength-based perspective. And the question is, how can we support, no, the young children and the adolescents who are most susceptible to the trauma? Because when the adults are traumatized, okay, nagtatranslate na yan, ano, sa mga bata, sa buong family, buong household. So, okay, before I go into anything, let's watch this, no? Kasi in 2016, I wrote about caring for families of young children in our textbook of family medicine. That was 2016, no? And nagbago ba? Do we have to reinvent the wheel? Actually, when I was reading it, no, it's the same thing, no? As early as that, actually, we started that writing that ano pa first decade pa of 2000, 20th century, but we finished it that late. But then, as early as then, we were already talking about biopsychosocial spiritual approach. But then, nobody's hearing us. Okay, we don't know. We have no language to concretize it and make it into a really palpable intervention and framework. Okay, so the pandemic set the tone for that, and that's one thing that is a silver lining, for this. Now everyone, same level, even the lay people, are learning, relearning things, so that the same goals ay ma-attain natin. It's just that there are more science, like in neuroscience, in molecular biology, in behavioral science, that support these goals. Sige, can we share that this very interesting video just to pep you up?
And the science of early childhood development can help us figure out the best ways to make this happen. There's a lot of science to draw from: molecular biology, neuroscience, genomics, and behavioral health. So figuring out how we can actually use all this knowledge can be a big challenge. But out of all of that science, we know that early childhood environments and experiences, even those before birth, shape our learning capacities, behaviors, and physical and mental health across the lifespan. That is huge. Even better, we can identify 3 key principles that anyone can use to better support developing children and the adults who care for them. And that's where you come in. As a community leader, policymaker, or practitioner, you bring your own knowledge, experience, and expertise to this challenge. And you can use these scientific principles to get better outcomes for the families you care about. Think of the principles as a guiding star. They can help you design better programs, practices, and services, and point you towards what's most important for helping children and families thrive. Principle 1. Support responsive relationships. Responsive serve and return interaction between adults and young children builds healthy brain architecture. Relationships help adults deal with life's challenges and help children build resilience. In fact, having stable, responsive relationships with committed adults is the single most common factor in children who develop the capacity to overcome serious hardship in life. Principle 2. Strengthen core skills. The essential skills we all need to successfully manage life, work, and relationships are learned through coaching and practice. starting in the earliest years and continuing into adulthood. Known as executive function and self-regulation skills, these crucial capabilities support our ability to focus, adapt to change, resist impulsive behaviors, plan ahead, and achieve goals. Principle 3, reduce sources of stress. Millions of children and families experience severe stress every day, caused by things like poverty, community violence, racism, substance abuse, mental illness, and more. Excessive unrelenting stress can be both disruptive and destructive for kids and adults. So doing everything we can about the sources of that stress is key. All of these principles are connected. Responsive relationships are one of the best ways to reduce stress and practice skills in a playful way. When we have less stress, we're better able to focus on people and skill building instead of putting out fires. And core skills can help us find solutions to challenging situations, giving us the time and energy for relationships. By applying these science by design principles, our policies, programs, and services can create the conditions and experiences that support child development at all levels, for the individual, in the community, and across society. Follow that guiding star, and you'll be on the path to better outcomes for every child and family.
Alright. Nakakatuwang isipin, ano? Kasi we are now full of uncertainties. But with that, we can be sure that our children will not be passive. Okay? With the right guidance and with us co-learning and relearning things, adapting with them, we can still look forward to a resilient next generation. Okay, so first, let's define ano ba talaga yung definition ng child, no? Actually, it transcends age lang, no? It's already, no? The childhood is already understood to be a social construction. Ibig sabihin, may mga determinants, no? Culturally, na madedetermine mo, hindi lang yung physical and cognitive or psychological development nila ang nagde-determine yan. So, there can be arbitrary differences. Okay? So, but then, can I click also? Sorry. Daniel?
Oh, wait ako.
Wait. So, I'll just tell you. Hindi ko pwede, i-click myself. Nasisira, nawawala.
Ayan ako.
Where is it now? Huh? Okay. So, first of all, let me orient you, to a kind of approach that can be taken by all, yung collaborative model. This is what we call trauma-informed, family-focused approach to child nurturing. We use generic terms na para na-embrace na ng lahat, okay? Hindi na tayo nagsa-silos, okay? So, para in that context, we would be more, yung developmental lens, mas nakukuha natin, longitudinal, yung perspective, yung continuum of care can be traversed seamlessly by many participants. So yun yung yun yung rationale why we want to deconstruct our traditional approaches na masyadong segmented ba, okay? So kung psychiatric lang, kung general practitioner, doon lang, primary care, tertiary care, masyado nating dinadichotomize masyado. And the disadvantage of that is that hindi natin nakikita yung pinaka-focus. Sino ba dapat ang focus natin? Ang mga bata, at ang adolescents. So, we should all be hands together, okay, in nurturing their capacity because the resilience is inherent in them, no? Hindi yan sa atin, hindi natin yan ibibigay sa kanila. All we can do is to unleash that potential and not be a hindrance for them to realize that. Kasi madalas, because of too much stress, yun nga, yung toxic stress na tinatawag, na-deplete na yung energy nila to develop the core skills that they need to adapt in ever-changing environmental situations. Okay? So, hindi yung hindi yung the fact na disrupt or nagkakaroon ng mga crisis situations, given na yan, no? Given na yan lagi. And if we, yun nga yung responsive relationships na tinatawag, if we can be there for them, not necessarily in terms of financial, of material provisions, but the psychological support that they need, no? That is built on trust and respect. Yun ang pinaka-key, no? Crucial, greatest determinant. So, the physicians, no? Nandyan yung we revolve around this. Kumbaga dito tayo like gears, no? Interacting with one another so that we can move forward. That's what we have to do. Next, please. So, next. Okay. So, yung mga theoretical cornerstones nito, no? Actually, isa-isa na yung naglabasa nitong decade na ito, no? Siguro hindi lang nung decade na to, even before, kaya lang yun nga hindi napapansin or we're too focused on the micro, the detailed aspects that we don't see the whole picture actually. And in that way, hindi tayo nakakapag consolidate ng ating efforts. So actually merong ecologic approach, may systems of care theory, theory of change, theory of differentiation, epigenetic theory, whole of person, whole of population, whole of planet, okay, resilience framework. Actually, ngayon, meron na yan, imagine. Nakikita na yan natin yung mga terms na yan sa universal healthcare law natin, di ba? So, how do we really make it into something that is on the ground? So, yun ang question. But take note of this, yung differentiation means, ang ganda ng sinasabi ng theory of the differentiation, in that it says that the child has the ability to choose which is relevant, okay, so that he or she can process this developmentally from his or her past experiences and make it, towards something positive. So, dun tayo nakaangkla, okay? So, this framework tells us of the 4 R's, no, of trauma-informed care na pwede nating matandaan, no, easily. And it says, realize, okay, the first R is to realize the widespread impact of trauma and understand potential paths for recovery. So while we will focus on depression and anxiety mostly tonight, okay, with our second speaker, our dear psychiatrist, dapat meron din kayong parang pinaka-wide view, okay, bird's eye view, na maraming forms of trauma that can happen or occur during the younger years and adolescent period. Second is to recognize, okay, have the high index of suspicion for the signs and symptoms of trauma, no, in our families and children. Kasi lalo na yung how do we differentiate, no, depression, for example, and anxiety from bipolar disorders, from personality disorders, from learning disabilities, okay? Maraming mga nuances na that we have to learn and have at least a grasp of para hindi tayo derail into something else and miss out on the more important diagnosis. Thirdly is to respond, no, by fully integrating knowledge about trauma into policies, procedures, clinical guidelines, and practices. Ito ang kulang pa tayo. Kaya gusto ko na together, no, with the Philippine Psychiatric Association and other organizations, the developmental pediatrics and the family physicians organizations can come together, and that's what we are trying to do. Aside from these webinars, we want to come up with really modules that can be resources for training. And lastly, to resist re-traumatization. Okay? So, kung ano tayo, preventive lagi. Kahit na sabihin mo na trauma na siya once, okay, we can still do something na hindi na yan mauulit. So, ang ano natin, ang goals natin dapat is, of course, physical and psychological and legal safety, no? Hindi lang yung i-cover natin or magiging consideration natin ang physical and emotional needs, but even the total picture, even affecting the educational systems and like that, because these are community networks where they are in normally. Like right now, of course, na-juggle yan, okay? So tayo na rin na, nag-homeschooling na rin ng parents, okay? So we have to reorient ourselves. But if we don't know the key goals and principles that we should hang on, mahirap gawin, diba? So what I want to discuss with you is not only what you will do in your practice or realize in your practice, but also what you can apply as a parent yourself, and if you are involved in a program, in a community program, how you can teach the allied health and the lay people. Okay? So ano yung dapat na tinuturo natin? Kasi we as family physicians, tayo nagle-leverage on both sides. Okay, so tayo yung middle ground, and we should be very collaborative in nature. We should know how to balance them. We should know how to listen to them. And we should know how to talk in a language that is understood by both. Okay? So ngayon, ang medyo mahirap, but nangyayari na no? Mga webinars natin, open na sa lay. Okay? Mga medical jargon dati, ngayon, common na sa mga tao. So, let's embrace that, no? That's a change that is actually for the good, okay? Because now they are science-based. They want to always understand the things, okay? Hindi lang sila basta tanggap ng tanggap. Ang kaso on the other end, ang hirap kasi ando ng false information, misinformation, and disinformation that we need to also guide our young children about. So, at the same time, we should make it a participatory approach. Ibig sabihin, yun nga, hindi lang sila passive. It's a very transactional approach in which the children themselves co-create the outcomes with us. Okay, so ganon ang dapat na orientation natin. And therefore, the safety and the welfare are the utmost considerations. Sila ang nasa center. Next slide. So these are the common types of childhood trauma, okay? And because of the pandemic, no, the loss of freedom, the grief from losing our loved ones, and poverty, okay, loss of jobs, ang dami nating other traumatic experiences, and we know this, no? Aside from the physical injuries and limitations of movement that we are into now. So it's really a disaster, but then it's up to us, no? It's up to us to make something out of it as an opportunity. Next, please. Okay, this slide is a key slide that gives us the impact of childhood trauma. Okay, we can see here ang daming effects, no, sa cognition, sa physical health, okay, sa emotions, relationships, mental health, behavior, and brain development, no. So all of these we should be cognizant, because this will be our motivating no, this will our compass for how we can navigate both forward and backwards, no. So pre-traumatic and post-traumatic, dapat we know how to reverse and how to prevent these kinds of trauma. Most are preventable, okay. So it's just a matter of really discovering and rediscovering the path why it happens, and therefore with the resilience potential of human beings, we can do so together. Next. So ano yung traumatic yung impact nito? Kadalasan siguro ang ano natin is may mga protective factors, individual and family. And ito always remember that the children's resilience is intrinsically linked with that of their parents or other caregivers. So ito ang findings even with forced migration. Ito kinuha ko to sa UN ng mga war conflict situations and forced migration, wherein yung accumulation of risk factors talagang nagkakaroon ng threat sa development nila. So ang findings is that we have to support both, no? The support will be both for the parents, the adults, and the children, because if we support both, synergistic na yung magiging effect nun sa mga bata. And even with limited resources like what we are now, okay, probably we can use platforms like this to do whatever we can to touch them in ways that we can psychosocially and spiritually. Okay, so ito yung protective factors: supportive marital relationship, okay, extended family. Naku, napaka natin ng Filipino family, no, because we are extended. Mostly nandyan ang presence ng even the elderly, okay, even ating mga close skins. Kaya kahit na may OFW phenomenon, okay, nandyan yung parang alternative supports for the family. Saka yung we are thankful na hindi pa ganun ka-disrupted ang marital relationship. Wala pa tayong ganun kadaming divorce couples here because we don't have the law for that yet. But in other countries, this is a very big problem. But what is important in their findings is that kahit na siguro may divorce, but the support of individual spouse can be there. Pa rin siya, healing, and there is a resilient factor that is still given. And of course, hindi natin ma-deny na ang long-term development effects ay grabe, no? I mean, life course So it's, sabi nga, yung parental styles natin, nakukuha din natin how we were raised, no? It's either we avoid them because we had negative experiences of them and we are changed for the better, or parang napifixate din tayo doon, okay? Parang nakukuha din natin yung patterns of behavior na nakita natin na role model sa atin. So common risk factors would be, of course, the previous traumatic experiences, okay, kung merong fear, kung separation, domestic violence, okay, loss of family home, familiar surroundings, friends, people, lalo na kung masyadong abrupt, loss of self-respect and self-confidence, poor diet and nutritional status, lack of opportunities for education, lack of opportunities for play and recreation, excessive burden of paid and or unpaid domestic work, and uncertainty about the futures. The uncertainty about the future is most felt in the adolescent, no? Kasi diyan yung time na nag-research sila for identity, meaning, okay? So, pag nafe-feel nila kahit hindi sinasabi, pero ramdam nila sa mga parents nila, and especially sa naririnig sa news, okay, nakikita sa social media, ay they become very affected. So, ito yung sinasabi kong the children's resilience is intrinsically linked, no? So, if we deal with the risk factors for the children and the risk factor for parents together, synergistic ang magiging effect. Kaya yung interventions ngayon, ang trend is to focus on both, hindi lang sa bata, or hindi lang tayo prescriptive sa mga bata. Ibig sabihin, yung ating approach will be tagging along, no, the presence, kung pwede nga pati father, no, na usually hindi pumupunta, no, sa clinics. But now, because of the limited consultation, yung face-to-face, actually it opened the door to opening, no, having more participatory kind of family consultations, okay, where we have both the parents and all the children, or even the siblings, and we can see them in the context of their homes. So this is something that is a positive thing, a positive change that we can build upon. So, of course, yung effects din, pag crisis, merong immediate, merong long term. Kaya yung immediate, kailangan nating iba-buffer, no? Kasi yung meaning yan usually, hindi navigate usually ng younger child. Kaya, tapos depende nga yan sa stage of development of the child and the personal characteristic also of the child, the presence and absence of supportive adults, and whether the child was personally involved as a victim or perpetuator. So, ito na yung traumatic, yung post-traumatic scenario. So, still, kahit na may ganon, kaya pa rin, ano? Ibig sabihin, if we know how to analyze what happened, together with the family, especially the caregivers, the parents, and if the child is already at age, to be able to discuss, we can even through observation, we can make analysis of what happened and therefore come up with interventions. So, well, iba-iba ang psychological impact sa mga bata, no? Some would be not, some would be withdrawn, some would regress to a lower stage, some would just present with lack of concentration, okay? But then, some can also somatize, nagiging physiologic, presenting with headaches, loss of appetite, energy, mood changes, until, yun nga, sa higher end would be, mas mahirap na, kailangan na ng more rebooting kind of intervention. Right? Young children sometimes would manifest with difficulties, forming with attachment. Minsan, ang hirap-hirap humanap ng yaya or ng magkikare sa kanila kasi estranged sila, para silang nagkakaroon ng traumatic, ng phobia with any persons. So, nangingilala, kumbaga, yung mga bata. And then there's expression of excessive fear, trouble eating, and being excessively irritable and fussy. okay, and problems with minsan nagbe-bedwet. Okay. Next, so behaviorally, madaming effects yan. And in for example, in disaster and crisis situations, no, for example, yung mga calamities, this is where the impact of play therapy works, no? Kasi nakikita natin that the play is also a fun way of applying those three core principles, no? Ibig sabihin, nagkakaroon ng relational bonding, no, with other kids, and then yung stress nare-relieve, nalalessen, okay? And therefore nagkakaroon tayo ng faster way of helping them out. Next. So, yung sa school children naman, okay, nagkakaroon ng aggressive behavior, and this sometimes it's expressed in bullying, okay, but in some it could be a withdrawal behavior, okay. They can also fixate in their own safety and the safety of others, like they can be express some violent behaviors against their peers, and sometimes nire-reenact nila yung traumatic event through play. Okay, so nagkakaroon din ng frequent nightmares during their sleep, and teachers would complain about their difficulty in concentrating. Yung nag-space out. Okay, madalas. Now, sa adolescents, yun din, dyan tumataas yung risk-taking behavior and self-destructive behavior, no? Andyan niyang mag-experiment in sexual promiscuity, okay? Kaya nandyan ang unprotected sex, illegal even the use of drugs, okay? So dito rin yung shaming, no, especially in social media, where they are too much addicted to, right, in this present generation. So there's a lot of things that we should be knowledgeable about with our children and adolescents. Okay, I think I have discussed this. Sige, move on na tayo sa iba. So protective factors, I'd just like to highlight here the importance of based on studies right now, current studies, that spiritual and cultural beliefs, goals or dreams for the future that gives a sense of meaning to a child's life are very important. Also, the development of talent or skill, for example, in art, music, sports, this can give them a way of putting into on a positive way their energies, rather than kung saan lang napapapunta. Okay? So this is very important. Now, yung cocoon strategy is essentially, no, if the parents default, ano yung nagpo-protect sa the best interest of the child, no? Kaya ang UN, no, andyan yung sa Convention on the Rights of the Child, very protective, no? May policy framework that the child should have the best interest considered, no? Especially in when we do programs for families in our communities and in our practices. So it's a child-centered situation wherein may protection. Okay, so may legal protection ang bata. Pwede nating surpass ang even the rights of the parents. 'Di ba? Ang rights ng parents is to decide primarily and foremost for the child, but if there is default in terms of protecting, such as in cases of abuse, no? So yan ang dapat mag-prevail. So ako as a family advocate and educator, inano ko yan, no, inaral ko pa rin yan. So that's the reason why I went into the WHO training for human rights in mental health law. Kasi doon mo marirealize how much important and strategic our support for the children is. And therefore, merong in place na mga regulatory frameworks to do this. Okay, so ayan, no? Protective factors pa rin ay yung facilitating supportive adult-child relationships, whether we are the parent, whether we are the doctor, whether we are the program director. Okay, so we should be the one developing the sense of self-efficacy and perceived control. Yung perceived control, even if there are things that are out of control, if we can help the child structure, here, even yung day-to-day, yung daily routine niya, that's already a sense of self-efficacy. And this is what are the basic principles na dapat nating gamitin. So provide opportunities to strengthen these adaptive skills. Okay? So universal rights is to integrate both at the child rights and a child development perspective always. Okay? So we should always bear in mind that they are not passive, and the social perspective of development should be our most central concern. Okay, next. I think I have discussed this, that if there is they can lose their rights. Okay, now how do we define resilience? Okay, resilience is positive childhood outcomes, not rejecting good positive outcomes despite exposure to trauma, prevention of trauma recurrence, and avoidance of traumatic experience. All of these three should be based on a systems approach. Ibig sabihin, all can come in from different levels, not only family. Because we can see that in the adolescents, mas na yung community network, school, okay, church, and other community institutions. So, dapat andun din yung presence natin, hindi yung nakatutok lang tayo dun sa bata when they are at home, but we should be able to tell stories, talk about what is important to them, especially yung peer aspect during the adolescent period. Next. So yeah, I think we can just give you the details. Actually, ang dami-daming activities guide, no? But this is just one example. But now that we are focused in the home, I think this is the time to explore and discover what we have at home that we can use, no? With playing with our children in a creative and learning way para we build the skills with them. Okay. Yeah, okay. So this talks about restoring structure. Okay, and siguro yung sa abuse is more on sa ibang na lang natin i-tackle. So principle of second is building the core skills through participation ng child, and we can in this ladder we can see na pwede nating anuhin yan, yung unti-untiin how much participation pwede natin i-titrate, how much participation they can give or they can do at a certain activity or play or chore at home. So ganun lang, and it comes with observing them and interacting with them, asking them what works and what they find easy or difficult. Okay. And the competencies will depend, of course, on their language ability, empathy, abstract thinking, understanding of time, capacity for controlling one's impulses, the ability to understand and accept participatory exercise, and the ability to concentrate, listen, analyze, project one's point of view, and ability to control emotions. Kaya itong makikita natin to no? Hindi lang sa mga normal activities of day-to-day living, but even in deliberately gathering them, like in a family conference. Yan yung very important then. And this slide just highlights the importance of nutrition. You know, it depends kung anong level. As a pregnant mother, very important that they are given the right nutritional support, especially when the neural part of the fetus is forming, yung first trimester. Okay, tapos sa toddler naman, because they are very starting from 6 months, of course, the high protein and the dapat all the vitamins and proteins the building proteins are available for intellectual development. And then ganun din sa schools, school age child, wherein nandiyan na-affect na yung mga moods nila, hindi lang yung nutrition, pati moods, may mood swings na dyan, so yung nutritional build up is very important. I mean the provision. But I would like to highlight yung sa infant, yung breastfeeding. Kasi ito just to share you the experience of my own daughter-in-law last year. Di syempre pandemic na noon. Nung una, third day pa lang post delivery, ang hirap-hirap na yung imagine hindi pa to working ang aking yung nipple yung hindi niya masak ang nipple. So it was very helpful na at this difficult period na pwede siyang give up. Kasi ang hirap nag-traumatize yung nipple and everything, tapos hindi mahuli-huli. Alam mo, we hired even a lactation specialist, and ayun, niya. And then after siguro mga 6 months, grabe na-develop naman siya na abscess. Okay, so ang hirap-hirap kasi pandemic, nakakatakot pumunta sa ospital, 'di ba, para magpa-drain ng abscess and all that. And I really admired my daughter-in-law for really persevering, And ngayon magto 2 years na niyang bine-breastfeed yung apo ko. And actually walang kasakit-sakit. Never siyang nagkaubo, nag-diarrhea, which is a very good, a very good thing. Aside from the bonding, aside from the very good emotional and psychological maturity that the child is having. Kakatuwa din, just to encourage you kasi, tapos yung the way, yung child-led weaning, Alam mo kung paano yun napapakain ng mga pechay, ng mga leaves. Di ba, tayo hirap na hirap, di ba, na i-orient into eating these things na usually dependent lang tayo sa mga prepared na, okay, kahit na sabihin natin So, things like that. Actually, going back to the basics ang kailangan natin. And I think the crisis is setting the mood for this, kahit na sabihin natin mahirap, kahit adversarial, at least na babalik tayo sa ganon. So actually, we can train parents and caregivers para nagkakaroon ng multiplier effect. Kasi pag nakikita natin yung mga ganong impact, no? Na, ay, doable pala, kaya pala. At saka, iba effect niya. Imagine, bakit ang iba, ang dali-daling makakatch ng virus, no? Cause ng rotavirus and all that, causing cough and colds. Bakit itong bata hindi nagkakasakit, no? Yun. So, we can. And these are examples how we can use, no, practice with real life situations so that we can really pinpoint the source of stressors and focus on motivational goals. Yun ang lagi nating i-tease out mo lagi yung goals. Very important to sa adolescents, no? Kasi when we counsel them and coach them, hindi ka dapat na masyadong pakialamera kasi ayaw nila noon, ano? Pero in a way, you would ask questions to them, throw out questions to them that yun sila yung magde-determine ano nga ba ang motivation ko, ano nga ba ang goal ko, and that I should focus on that. So, this is what we call building skills, executive function skills ang tawag dito, ano? Ibig sabihin kasi we are made or created with the brain with levels yan, 'Di ba ang higher cognition nandun sa hypothalamus. Siya yung center of regulation. So, may executive function dapat yan. And when we build the core skills early in life, nakikita natin na yung neural connections sa to nagde-develop ng in a more intricate manner. Okay. So merong we can we can use two approaches. We can make the individual empowered to have activities, and at the same time we can use collective or environmental or macro approaches na tinatawag to reset the balance of self-regulation. Ibig sabihin, if meron ding reasons why the parent is having stress, stressful reactions, hindi rin siya nakaka-adapt dito sa destabilizing crisis, pwede nating sabay silang bibigyan ng interventional activities, supportive activities. But right now, since yun nga, limited tayo sa face-to-face, it's a matter of telling them, and they can do it autonomously on their own. They can practice it, and I think it works now because through webinars and telehealth, teleconferences like this, we can do learning activities. So, okay. So, these are just examples, okay? And lastly, ito yung principle is yung how do we reduce the sources of stress? First is make even the lay people understand that we have the capacity. The children have the capacity, okay, in their brains to sort out stress that is not harmful, not toxic. So that hindi yung primitive reflexes ang natitrigger. So, ito yung pinaka-primary principle, Matitrigger ang, nai-store kasi ang more primitive automatic reflexes pag sa amygdala, yung lower brain. Pag yung higher brain function ay hindi gumagana, But if we develop the higher brain function of the cerebrum early in life, therefore these are the core skills, yung executive function, sila ang natitrigger, kaya mas nagiging purposeful at nagiging transcendent ang mga bata even when there are crisis or adversity situations. So yung toxic stress nalilesen, because if we let stress reach the toxicity level, okay, yung response natin, it will destroy not only our mental health, not only the brains, the neural systems, but even the other end organs that are involved in metabolic processes lang, cardiovascular, the gut, okay, even the endocrine and the immune system. Kaya ngayon yung NCDs, yung non-communicable diseases, they are taken together kasi even prenatally daw, na-develop na yan. Kaya ngayon makikita natin with this data na even the cardiovascular, heart disease, the depression, they are a form of inflammation that has occurred even in long periods, across the lifespan, even prenatally and postnatally. Kaya very important that we educate our clients and patients with this, kasi hindi sila aware hindi sila aware na nasa akin pala, na pala yan, natural na pala yan, na kaya lang na-over-use, na-over-trigger such that napapapunta yung stress response, which should be a natural flight and fight response para tayo to enable us to do something, to react to a crisis situation or a shock response, or a shock surprise response in a good way, in a way that can be adaptive. But pag nasosobrahan, nagiging na siya, destructive. So how do we titrate? How do we help them? Make them aware. Teach it, Teach it. Kahit na sabihin natin boring pa siya or mahirap, we can simplify Simplify na lang natin yung na, alam mo, ganito. Minsan ginagamit namin cartoons, I can show you some of this later on. So this just highlights, yung importance of prenatal nutrition and even the psychological makeup of the pregnant woman. And this we see, the difference of toxic stress on the neuronal damage. Okay, so fewer ang connections niya, So yung wirings of the brain are really affected. Next. So ito yung science of epigenetics. Ito yung emerging area of scientific research that show how environmental influences, ibig sabihin yung experiences, brought about by the child rearing, other persons, and the environment impacts the development of the genome. Ngayon, alam na natin ang genome. Kaya ko sinasabi to kasi, may language na tayo para i-educate natin ang mga pasyente natin na ang genes mismo na aapektuhan how we deal with our children. Okay? So, parang yung tinatawag na ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences. Okay? Actually, it can work both ways, positively and negatively. But how come others, can work with it positively? So, it's the degree of the support yung protective factors offered by caregivers. So the young brains particularly very sensitive to this. Okay, next. Sige. Probably we can skip that. Okay, so we can reduce the effects of ACEs and toxic stress. How? One way is makikita natin nga yung sinabi ko, yung play. Next, please. Siguro yung next, please. Okay. Yung, wait. Can we go back? Yan, okay. Yung importance ng developing the right kind of play as part of the growing child's activities, Let's make sure that we allow enough experimentation for the child. Wag yung yung overcorrecting, kasi pagka sila nalilimit yung kanilang creativity and they take it negatively. So actually play is a very teamwork building and trust building form of activity, cognitive, okay, and the emotional the emotional processing and problem-solving activities of the child is developed. Kahit na yung peek-a-boo, okay, yung peek-a-boo na very simple way, it teaches them something, no? That in reality, the people they trust can come and go. Okay, so it makes them more stable to expect that kind of pattern. Yung serve and return, no? Ibig sabihin ng serve and return, no? You do something and then they will see how you react. Kaya hindi ba madalas siya magda-drop sila and they will see ano man nangyari. Cause and effect, they are experimenting on that. So, we provide rich, kahit na no matter how simple, activities and things in our house. For as long as they are safe, okay, yung mag-avoid ng injury or accident, provide them. And be there for them to interact with them. Stories, books, no? Nature. Because these will take them away from naturally, no, hindi na natin kailangan silang i-effort pa na ilayo sa too much digital gadgets or things. But if we orient them with this and we role model this with them, ayun, natural na animal pets, no, can teach them simple nurturing skills. Like when they see you feeding the fish, okay, they see aquarium in your house. They see you patting the dog and caring for the needs of the animals in the house. These are very simple, natural ways of role modeling and teaching the children. So, ayun lang. Gusto ko lang as family wait, can we go back, no? Yung awareness lang ng certain family dynamics kasi tayong mga family physicians ang very dito, no, adept. Let's be very aware of sibling rivalry, okay, middle child syndrome, alliances, and dysfunctional role assumptions, no. I hope I don't have to pero minsan sa kabisihan natin kahit alam natin theoretically, nakakalimutan natin. And this one, I'd like to have a special slide for this. How do we promote good digital behavior? How do we promote well-being? Actually, principles lang yan no? It's a matter of really being present to discuss things with our children, especially the adolescents. Be good role models. No? Kakatawa nga kasi yung apo ko, marunong na siyang magpindot ng skip ad sa YouTube. Marunong na siya kasi nakikita niya sa daddy. So, medyo, rin tayo, no? Be aware na, masyado na nakikita ng mga bata na nandun na ako sa Okay? We should set rules na pagka in mealtime, wala dapat mga gadget, no? Yung mga things like that. We should have an age-appropriate involvement, setting limits, okay? Awareness of limiting blue light exposure and sedentariness, okay? That promotes obesity kasi masyado na silang nandun. And also, setting limits to certain things na hindi nila dapat nakikita at their age. So, yon. And always educate them that the motivation should be what you should learn. Skills that are productive, okay? Like how it can build their talents in certain areas and processing their emotions and relationships also. Be there to know and interact even with their peers. So, yun. Actually, hindi naman natin pwedeng sabihin na, wag yan, no? Andyan na yan eh. No? It's already. Like the reality of OFW syndrome na andyan na talagang, wala ang yung absenteeism, parental absenteeism. Andyan na yan. So, let's find ways how we can amplify support given those situations. Actually, sa family meetings, sabi ko nga kanina, very na rin ang Zoom meetings ngayon. So we can have face-to-face, virtual, or even blended. Like, I have my eldest daughter in Japan, but na-realize namin na with this situation, mas nagkakapag-interact kami than before, no? Dati magkasama kami, pero pagpasok niya sa room, wala na, hindi na kami mag-uusap. But now, because we can regulate for example, mag-send siya ng message, hindi mo man masagot yan right away, but later on, you have a response then. So, minsan it works better kasi mas nakakapag-isip ka, no, sa mga responses mo. Things like that. And it's very important that in family meetings, yung facilitating skills natin, paganahin natin, okay, let each one participate and make sure they are heard and validated. And kahit na batang maliit, isama, okay? Because let's be creative also in making it very iba-iba, hindi yung boring, so that they can look forward to having those family meetings. So, just summarizing, of course, sa young children, okay, ang foundational ay stable, responsible relationships, okay? That yung element of trust ay na-preserve, because this will determine how they form relationships in the future. Safe, supportive home, okay, no matter how simple, and the nutrition, no matter how simple, pero complete. Sa adolescents naman, important na yung community networks, no, and capacities ay alam nating i-navigate with our adolescents, okay? So, nandun yung tayo with the teachers, okay? Interact tayo with their peers. That's very, very important. In fact, I deliberately transferred church kasi nakita ko na yung time na yon was a time na gusto ko yung peers nila will be in the same campus where they are. Hindi yung logistically mahirap. And then I welcomed all their peers in our home for music, for anything, bonding. And then, diba? So I tell them, oh, you can do anything, even drink. Diba? Kasi we're there. Ganon. Ang sarap-sarap lang. I mean, it really worked for us. So, okay. Again, executive and self-regulation. Importante, self-regulation. We have all imperfections, but if we are self-aware, we can self-regulate. I always tell that, okay? So, dapat nandun yung patience natin with one another to wait, no, for each other na maging co-learner and partners tayo ng ating mga anak. Okay? So, pag nakikipag-usap tayo, pati yung body language natin, nandun yung bababa tayo, no? Para lang to be able to talk with, no? Hindi talk down or talk to, talk with. Because when we talk with, there is an interaction. So, as we're winding up, ibabalik ko na naman kayo dito sa, this is a reworking of the biopsycho socio-spiritual approach, okay? The science of wholes, whole person, whole population. Now we see the value of public health, whole of planet. Now we know the need to reconnect with nature. So yan, isama-sama natin into one framework, and this is called by Frankel and Shaw in the Journal of Family Practice as a strategy for coping for this pandemic. So it's like reaching up, reaching down, reaching in, and reaching around. So when you talk about reaching up, and it does not necessarily mean religion, no? It means finding meaning and sense with transcending, no, the self, no, connecting with others, and seeing the value of sensible relationships. And even in religion, there are relational kind of religion that role models this, like nakikita natin that they have a relationship with a higher being whom they believe has more control. So when they are not in control, yun ang nagpapalakas sa kanila. There's the source of transcendence and strength for them. And then reaching down is, grounding with nature. Then natin marirealize yung importance and value of whole foods. Now we are navigating that. Nakikita natin yung processed foods, wala eh. No? It just creates all the NCDs in our systems, in our bodies. So kailangan, let's go back to what the ground has to give to us. Not only nutritionally, but psychologically. We see how we are more relaxed. Tignan mo, dami naging plantitos and plantitas during the pandemic, no? Because nakikita nila yung how it detoxifies the air, it just the sight of it, no? The beauty that is very natural relaxes us despite the stress. And then reaching in, of course, dito natin makikita yung mind and body resonance. Lalo na sa adolescents, very important that they see this, no? Yung balance ng body, kasi dyan na-form yung masyado silang sa body nila, conscious because of the pubertal changes, and they are very conscious, no, sa mga comments ng iba, ganyan. But then this is the time to orient them that actually may resonance dapat ang mind and body, no? In the mental health with the body, in the aspect of brain regulation and regulation of stress. And lastly, reaching out, no? Social systems connectedness, no? Yung seeing ourselves in the context of social relationships. Hindi magiging adapted ang mga anak natin if the social skills are not taught early on, no? The life skills. Kaya very important that we make them participate in the house chores early on, kahit may kasambahay pa kayo o wala, no? It's very important na they see, they take part in, for example, creative cooking, no? Para nakikita nila yung outcomes, magagandang outcomes. So, I think that's the end of it. Meron pa ba? Well, just the key points, no? Sobra na yata ako. Oh my God. Families with young children and adolescents is most critical life cycle to make or break, okay? Particularly this pandemic and beyond. Having a fuller grasp of unchanging science-based developmental goals and principles from a collaborative trauma-informed lens, both micro and macro, is foundational, okay? This pandemic is truly a traumatic experience for both caregiver and children, but if we can learn to deconstruct our approaches, we can adapt, adhering to our key goals and still get positive outcomes. Thank you for listening. I give you now to our
Thank you very much, Dr. Sigua, for that very comprehensive lecture, tackling most of the things regarding the bio, psychosocial, spiritual approach
experiential din.
in managing our patients, especially those with the family in the later years and family with the adolescents. Ako yun, Dr. I am so, thank you very much, Dr. Sigua. We will now proceed to the second lecture before we go to our open forum. So our next speaker is a cum laude graduate of BS Psychology at the University of Santo Tomas. She's also a Doctor of Medicine, Faculty of Medicine and Surgery from University of Santo Tomas. She finished her residency training in the Department of Psychiatry at the Medical City, where she became Chief President. She is also she did her fellowship training section of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry at the UPPGH. She is now the head of the Outpatient Services Department of Psychiatry at the Medical City, the Assistant Training Officer section of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry at the Medical City, an active consultant of both the Medical City and St. Luke's Medical Center, Quezon City. She's also a clinical faculty of the Ateneo School of Medicine and Public Health, a faculty of St. Luke's College of Medicine. So colleagues, please help me welcome our next speaker, Dr. Bell Erica Nubla Gestivo.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Yosef, for that kind introduction. Can you see and hear me? I'm hoping you can see and hear me well. And I'll have Daniel present my slides. All right, thank you for that. Thank you to the Philippine Academy of Family Physicians and Lundbeck for this invitation to be one of your speakers for tonight's webinar. And definitely Dr. Sigua has extensively discussed with you a lot about post-traumatic trauma-focused approach for children and their family, and even the nature of adolescent and how we can build resilience in them. So for this part of my lecture, I'd like to focus more on adolescents and specifically depression in this age group. Maybe we can move to the next slide, Daniel. All right. As I mentioned, my discussion will focus on adolescents and the mental health issues that they are confronted with, the depression in young people, as well as the clinical approach to it, and the shared care between family physicians and psychiatrists. Okay, so adolescence, it is a universally accepted truth that it is a period of transition between childhood and adolescence and adulthood. I mean, during this time of transition, there's a lot of changes that happen in different aspects of development. We have major changes happening in the physical, sexual, psychological, social, and spiritual level for these adolescents. And interestingly, they all happen at the same time. A lot of opportunities are presented to the adolescents, and they themselves also tend to seek out opportunities for themselves because of their very normative need for autonomy, for a sense of autonomy. And when this just going back, when they're able to successfully navigate these opportunities, their growing sense of autonomy is reinforced. They're able to build life skills that will be helpful for the rest of their lives, and they grow confident in their emerging sense of self. However, it is also a time of risks. When these changes and novel situations that they encounter are not successfully overcome, they tend to bring risks in terms of conflicts, maladjustments, or disorders for this population. And one of the risks that come with one of the disorders that come with this is, again, depression and other mental health disorders. Next. So in understanding the adolescent stage, we'd also like to look into what accounts for the uniqueness of their characteristics and vulnerabilities. And I think naturally, we start with the adolescent brain because it's very unique and it tells us a lot of information about this population. So it seems to be a very busy slide, but I'll try to make my discussion about it very simple and concise. What we do know about the maturing adolescent brain is that most of the brain functions associated with maturity and adulthood, they don't appear until age 25. And it even comes at a later time for other people. That's why the preteens or even the older adolescents, the teens, are years away from reaching their full maturity in their brain, even though as a society, we actually classify anyone over age 18 as legal or an adult. The WHO actually came up with a category of young adults, young people, to cover the age group of 10 to 24 years old. And I think that takes into consideration significantly the way that the brain maturity takes time, the brain maturation takes time. Okay, so in the adolescent brain, what we also know is that it happens at different rates and at different areas. Okay, it usually proceeds from in a bottom-up direction, wherein the basal parts of the brain, you have there, I'd like to direct your attention on the amygdala and the ventral striatum, which are in the basal areas of the brain. And these are areas that are involved in emotion processing. Okay, they mature earlier before the prefrontal cortex. So the prefrontal cortex is the one that's responsible for the executive functions, which Dr. Sigua has discussed a while ago. So as a review, executive functions have to do with planning, organizing, problem solving, and decision making. So in the basal area, the amygdala, as I mentioned, is the seat, it's part of the limbic system, which is the seat of emotion. And the ventral striatum is the part that plays a role in reward pathway. And it's also associated with the limbic system. So we can think of these two areas, or the basal area of the brain, as the engine that revs up, that gets us revved up or charges us up with emotions. And on the other hand, the prefrontal cortex, we can think of as the brake in that engine, in that it imposes control, it imposes self-control, so that we don't always have to give in to our impulses, okay? But as I mentioned, it proceeds in a bottom-up direction. Wherein, early on in adolescence, we see a more prominent development of the emotional areas. Before the development of the logical part of our brain. Okay, and this can explain to us why there's the risk-taking, pleasure-seeking, and impulsive nature of our adolescents. And we also know, this also helps us understand why only later on, even in early adulthood, by age 20, by mid-20s, can they learn to think before they act. And only at the time that the prefrontal cortex develops, will they be able to delay their own impulsive reactions in the service or in favor of a logical decision-making and skillful problem-solving. So that in itself tells us a lot about why they act the way that they do. And it's driven a lot by how the brain is working at that time in their life. Next. So I'm not gonna go into very extensive details of how the brain works for the adolescents, but this is just another aspect of brain maturation or the biological maturation that I'd also want to discuss, because it's very relevant to how we are able to refine the way that the brain works. Okay, so this slide shows you the synaptic density and pruning from birth at 6 years old and at 14 years old. And you will see there that there are different synaptic densities at each of these age groups. So during adolescence, there is a great architectural change happening in the brain. There's a restructuring that is characterized by extensive neural pruning, and this leads to marked decreases in the prefrontal gray matter volume. And the decrease in the prefrontal gray matter volume is actually correlated with brain maturation. So pruning is actually a healthy process because it allows the elimination of the redundant or unneeded synaptic connections in the brain so that we can come up with a more refined and more efficient adult brain. However, the pruning process may also explain the finding that most of the major psychiatric disorders have their onset during the vulnerable period of adolescence, because pruning, as it happens, may reveal the genetically or experientially vulnerable circuits in the adolescent brain. Or it may lead to a developmental trajectory that is different from a healthy person's brain development. All right, so that's how, those are the things biologically I see to be relevant when it comes to understanding the behavior or the uniqueness of the adolescents. And after that, I'd also want to look into or present to you how the mind works. We've talked about the brain, now we look into the mind. And in understanding the mind of the youth today, we'd want to look into the generational characteristics. Next slide. All right. So as we know, any generational cutoff is arbitrary. There are different definitions for different generations, but I'd like to use this specific categorization, with the youth being referred to as the iGen. And the cutoff is for those who are born within the period of 1995 to 2012. The 1995 is pertinent here because that was the year when internet was commercialized. And the oldest member of this generation were in their early adolescence when iPhone was introduced in 2007. So that is also the main reason why they're called iGen. Okay, next. Jean Twenge actually wrote a whole book about the iGen, and she described this generation in various terms, starting off with internet. As I mentioned, this is the generation that was born with internet as part of their world. They never knew a day that there was no gadget or there was no internet, compared to us millennials or even the older generations. Now, we grew up for a certain number of years knowing that there wasn't, not knowing internet and having a lot of activities that are outside of gadgets. But for this population, gadgets and internet is actually an extension of themselves. A lot of their leisure activities, a lot of their social life revolved in the internet. And that's why a lot of their characteristics as a generation also is influenced by the internet. I hope to just briefly discuss some of the important points of their generational characteristics. Their generation is said to be insecure, and this is again largely related to the use of internet, wherein everyone can be online 24/7, and they have this term FOMO, fear of missing out, because there's always a pressure to be keeping up with everyone online and in person, but more online. There's also the seen zoned and cancel culture, which can really make people insecure. When you've been seen zoned and you don't get a reply, it makes you insecure about how is this person reacting to me? What is this person's reaction to me? And when you get that cancel culture basically means that for those social media personalities, if the followers dislike what they're doing or dislike an aspect of them, they get canceled and everyone else unfollows them. So it brings a lot of insecurity in this generation, knowing that they can easily be canceled by their peers. Okay. Another aspect of another characteristic is that they're in person no more, meaning even before the pandemic, and especially during this time of the pandemic and lockdown, there's very limited in-person interaction. And studies have shown that when there's excessive internet use or there's very limited in-person interaction, then that leads to unhappiness. They're also known to be the indefinite generation because things can be left unlabeled. The relationships can go unlabeled, nothing formal, nothing official. That's why you have the FUBUs, you have the hooking up, you have dating apps that you can keep only at an internet level and not necessarily have to come with certain responsibilities in the relationships. Okay, those initial characteristics seem to put them a bit at a disadvantage, but there are also positives in this generation in that they are independent. They're independent thinkers with the availability of a lot of information online. They're able to feed themselves with information, sometimes accurate, sometimes not, but this information help them define their values, help them define their personality. And one good thing that comes out of it is that they're also inclusive. Inclusive in terms of being very much against discriminations of the minority. They're very inclusive in terms of gender identity, in terms of race, in terms of preferences and other bases for minority. Okay. The other aspect of that the independent thinking in them leads to is they also tend to be irreligious. So we know that during adolescence, there's a tendency to experiment and try to know your identity, and part of exploring your identity is exploring your religious faith or spiritual faith. And this generation, since they have a lot of information, they're also becoming more and more aware of how some religions tend to be rigid, have too many rules, and tend to be intolerant of certain individuals. And this has brought a culture of being irreligious. We often encounter a lot of adolescents saying that they're atheists, they do not subscribe to any religion. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, I think, as long as they're able to keep their faith and their spirituality. Okay, but being irreligious is a reflection of how they have the ability to assert their autonomous choices. Okay, they're also in no hurry primarily because of the tendency for helicopter parenting. Parents are very nurturing, and sometimes it gets to the point for this generation that they're in no rush to leave childhood, so that adolescence becomes an extension of childhood rather than the beginning of adulthood. And with that comes the tendency to not have a lot of opportunities to learn life skills. Okay, so those are just some traits of this generation and some of the ways that their mind works. Next. So, given what we know about the adolescent brain and how their mind works, we also look into the mental health of this population. So it is also an established fact that childhood and adolescence are high-risk periods for the development of psychiatric disorders. In fact, half of all mental health conditions start by age 14 years. And among these mental health conditions, depression is one of the leading causes of illness and disability among adolescents, and even among young people, 10 to 24 years old. And what's also striking is that the lifetime prevalence of depression increases dramatically from 1% of the population under 12 years to 17 to 25% of the population by the end of adolescence. And the greatest surge in the newly emergent cases occur between ages 15 and 18. So there's a sharp increase in cases of depression by the end of adolescence. Next. All right. Relating this to COVID-19, we know that the COVID-19 pandemic has created a significant burden on the mental health of the general population. And another thing to highlight is that the mental health of young people in studies have been shown to be disproportionately affected relative to older adults. So there are various factors that contribute to them being the vulnerable population. They are considered vulnerable because cognitively they're at a disadvantage in terms of knowing how to problem solve, how to take care of themselves. Socially, they don't have a lot of voice in the society yet, especially in certain cultures. And when it comes to social support, sometimes they get to be neglected because people are so busy handling more adult issues, and sometimes their needs get overlooked. Next. All right. This finding of the youth being at an additional risk or burden from the pandemic is actually supported by local studies, and one of those was done by the group of Dr. T in last year when they found that being of young age and being students are among the identified risk factors for psychological distress, depression, and anxiety, especially during the early parts of the pandemic. Next. So I'd like to go over some of the risk factors for depression in youth. And what we do know is that as with adults, depression occurs from a combination of genetic vulnerability and environmental stressors. And this is very much related to what Dr. Sigo was saying about the epigenetic principle, wherein there's the environmental experiences or stressors tend to influence the genetic vulnerability or even the manifestation of the illnesses. So when it comes to the relative role of the factors, what we know is that environmental influences appear to have more dominant role in younger children. Whereas for those with first episodes of depression in adolescence, the heritability may play a larger role. Still, we know that they are interacting, and any depression is a combination of all of these factors. So we've talked about the brain structure and changes a while ago. Genetics is a big factor, as I mentioned, and depression is 40 to 50% heritable. There is an increased risk of depression in children of parents with the disorder, and the risk is further increased if for the child if the parent had developed the disease early on in his or her life. So those are important information to get when exploring the symptoms of a patient or history of a patient. Hormonal changes are very evident during puberty. And we know that a dramatic feature of the epidemiology of depression is that there is the appearance of a female preponderance during adolescence, which is not present during childhood. Okay, so the female preponderance actually begins at around age 10 to 12 and is well established by age 15 that there's a 2:1 ratio for female to male incidences of depression. Okay. This may be a factor of the hormones because estrogen and progesterone, which are increasing in level and activity during puberty, have impacts. Actually can impact the neurotransmitter systems that involve serotonin and norepinephrine, which are the main neurotransmitters implicated in depression. Also, we do not want to overlook the role of other factors outside of hormones that can lead to this female preponderance, such as sex role, like gender-based roles, making girls or women lean towards being more passive and less mentally tough than boys. There are also social factors wherein we know that there's a tendency for women to be differentially exposed to greater number of life events that are stressful. And when it comes to lifestyle factors, sleep. We talk about sleep, we talk about diet, we talk about exercise, sun exposure, and computer use. Sleep is an important factor in mental health. And in adolescence, we know that the circadian rhythm actually undergoes a natural shift that leads to a delayed sleep phase. So they tend to sleep later, and that's because of how the circadian rhythm or their body clock adjusts during puberty. This is worsened by certain activities that keep adolescents awake, such as being online gaming, because again, internet is 24/7. Everyone is online 24/7. Okay, so sleep deprivation is actually stressful to the body, and that stress is a risk factor for mental illness. Okay, diet. Dr. Zigo has also alluded to this in her lecture. Now there's growing evidence that gut health is also very much related to mental health. What we eat can spell a difference in terms of how we feel, primarily through the serotonergic system, which is present in the gut. And again, serotonin being a major neurotransmitter involved in depression. Again, we've previously talked about internet and computer use as a factor. Technology in itself is not bad, but the quality and quantity of use can spell the difference. Okay. Exercise as part of lifestyle factor is very important because data has suggested that active people are less depressed than inactive people, and people who are active and stopped abruptly or for one reason or another tend to be more depressed than those who are able to maintain or initiate an exercise program. There are actually some researches that have identified the amount of exercise per week that is helpful for the mental health or for the mood. And it's somewhere between a minimum of 150 to 180 minutes per week. So it's like if if you do exercise 5 times a week, it's around at least 30 minutes a day, and that's usually helpful in terms of the mood. Sun exposure is part of lifestyle and physical health because now there are some studies that point to vitamin D from the sun as being associated with depression. Although the directionality of this association remains unclear, we see that there is some role for vitamin D in terms of helping with recovery from depression, not as a cure, but more of just supplemental adjunctive help. And people, there's a more robust therapeutic effect on subjects with major depression when they're given concurrent vitamin D supplementation. This is for cases with deficiency in vitamin D. And based on my practice, if you try to get the vitamin D level of your patients, a lot of them will turn out to have very low vitamin D because the lockdown and the pandemic really has limited our outdoor activities. So I always tell my patients it's not just good for the health, for bone absorption, it's also good for the mental health. All right, next. Oh, sorry. I'd also, just going back, Dr. Sigua has also talked about adverse childhood experiences. And yes, they are factors for depression because we know that early stress arising from childhood adversity is actually a predisposing factor for major depression. And depression is the most common adult sequela of early abuse. So when we talk about adverse childhood experiences, it's not just the abuse or neglect. It also includes major family changes, peer rejection, moving different houses. There's actually a list of various adverse childhood experiences that we want to be aware of so that the modifiable ones, as Dr. Sigua has mentioned earlier, we can address. Okay, so when it comes to developmental challenges, we know again that there's a lot of challenges being met by this population, and we know that they have to be navigating the peer and romantic relationships while at the same time finding out their identity or getting to know themselves. There are changing rules and expectations from them in the world that they're new in, and there's the need for autonomy and limited problem-solving skills. So these are developmental challenges that they're confronted with, and again, might be risk factors. Next. For the clinical part, I just wanted to present to you the DSM-5 criteria for major depression. DSM, I'm sure you're all familiar with it. That's our Bible in psychiatry. That's what we use in diagnosing. And the criteria for depression among children and adolescents is no different from the criteria for adults. There are just some uniqueness that I'll be just discussing with you briefly. So for the criteria, first you have to have 5 or more of the 9 symptoms there in the picture, in the diagram, in the same 2-week period, which presents an actual change from previous functioning. And out of those 5 symptoms, there has to be, one of them has to be either depressed mood or loss of interest or pleasure. So the 9 symptoms are, again, loss of interest, sleep changes, either hypersomnia or insomnia, difficulty concentrating, or sometimes it may manifest as not being able to keep up with schoolwork, failing to pass in exams, which is a change from the child's previous functioning. And then you'd see low energy level, feeling so sluggish, difficulty getting out of bed. And then you also have appetite changes, which can lead to weight loss, or for some children, failure to meet the target weight for their age. And again, depressed mood. Okay, the depressed mood in children can be replaced by irritable mood. And then there's that inappropriate sense of guilt. Okay, they feel so guilty about things that they're not even involved in. They feel inappropriately responsible for things happening around them. Okay, there's slowed thinking or movement. The sluggishness, not just in physical but also in thinking. They're slowed in thinking, and there can be suicidal thoughts. So you need 5 of those 9 over a same 2-week period, which represents a change in functioning. Next criteria are, next slide. All right. We have to make sure that these symptoms also cause clinically significant distress or impairment in the person's social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. So for children, it's usually in terms of their academic performance and in their peer interactions. Suddenly, and there's a lot of decline in the academic performance, or there's a lot of irritability and conflicts with peers. So that's how it can present. And then criteria C, D, and E basically are exclusion criteria. We want to make sure that we diagnose it right by ruling out conditions that are secondary to substances or another medical condition. We want to make sure to rule out other psychotic disorders. And very importantly, we want to make sure that we rule out previous manic or hypomanic episode, which if present, might point more to the depressive episode being that of a bipolar depression rather than a major depressive disorder. And that is important because management of bipolar depression is very much different from the management of major depression. Okay, next slide. So just to give you some unique features of depression in the youth, for the very young children, they tend to present with symptoms of listlessness, they're sad, they're apathetic, although these symptoms are more observed rather than reported. And a lot of times, the very young children may not be able to articulate these feelings verbally. For pre-pubertal kids, they present more with somatic complaints, psychomotor agitation, a lot of restlessness there, or irritability and outbursts, and mood congruent hallucinations. So mood congruent hallucinations refer to when they're feeling very, very sad, then their hallucinations might be related to voices being deprecating towards them or demeaning towards them. Okay. For adolescents, they present more with anhedonia, or the inability to anticipate or experience pleasure in activities that they usually would enjoy. There's a sense of hopelessness. There's a sense of rest. There's also restlessness, psychomotor retardation, a lot of sluggishness, a lot of inability to get out of bed and do their usual activities. They'd be socially isolating, which is a far cry from their usual need to be with their peers. They can have delusions or the fixed false belief. They can be less attentive to personal appearance. It's not uncommon to see an adolescent who would go on for days not bathing, not brushing because of the depression. And there's a tendency to be increasingly sensitive to rejection by peers and in romantic relationships, primarily because these are the people that are part of their significant relationships. And regardless of age, of course, you see suicidal ideations, again, depressed or irritable mood, insomnia, and diminished ability to concentrate. All right, next. In general, mood disorders that happen early on in life tend to be chronic, and those of childhood onset compared to adolescent or adult onset may be the most severe form. Children are likely to have secondary complications such as conduct disorder, substance abuse, and antisocial behavior. And this may reflect a lot of their difficulty in terms of problem solving, limitations in impulse control, or even inability for effective communication. We also know that functional impairment extends to practically all areas of psychosocial functioning for children. And school performance, as I mentioned, is invariably affected. Sometimes depression may be diagnosed as a learning disorder just because the child underperforms compared to what is expected of him or her. It's very rare that a child, and only a highly intelligent and academically oriented child, can maintain a level of can compensate for these difficulties in concentration and learning. But what we do know is that these difficulties in academics, even when it's long-standing, can be corrected rapidly when the child recovers from depression. So that's one of the major distinguishing points between learning underperformance, academic underperformance in depression, and the real learning disorder. Next. So I presented with you to you the DSM-5 criteria, but there are also diagnostic tools that you can use to measure the depression or look into depression among adolescents. And they may also be used in following the course of the condition and the response to treatment. I put in there the formats and the age groups that they're approved for. And of note is PHQ has a shorter version, which is called PHQ-9, and it is available in Tagalog, Cebuano, and Ilonggo. So if it might be very useful for those population that are not as, sorry, hold on, sorry about that. For those population that are not very familiar with the English language. All right. Next. So after the diagnosis, given the burden of the illness, what's happening in the adolescent brain and mind, the diagnosis, we want to look into the clinical approach to depression in adolescents. And it is very crucial that we address the mental health of young people, because the consequence of not addressing adolescent mental health conditions extend to adulthood. Okay, it affects the rest of the development moving forward for them, and therefore it limits their opportunities to live fulfilling lives as adolescents and all the way until their adulthood. And based on WHO, when we invest in adolescent health in general, this ensures triple dividends, because there's a gain in terms of health during adolescence, there's health during later adulthood, and there's even health for their future generation. So it's very important to act now so that we have triple dividends or triple gains. So next slide. All right. This guideline shows us about how we actually come up with clinical decisions for treatment. So usually for mild depression, we limit the management to psychoeducation, self-management, and psychological treatments like psychotherapy. And antidepressants are known to, studies on antidepressants have shown that they're effective for moderate to severe depression. The classification of mild, moderate, severe, if you look at the SM criteria, is basically just telling you that if it's mild, it means that if there is few, if any, symptoms in excess of the bare minimum, which is 5 out of 9. So if there's 5 or 6, maybe it's mild, okay? And if there's impairment, but mild impairment, then it's mild. Severe is when you have more than substantially in excess number of symptoms than what is required to make the diagnosis. So it's 5 out of 9, so you have 8 or 9, and then major and severe impairments, then that is severe. Somewhere in between is the moderate. So it's more of a clinical judgment to how you classify them. But for moderate and severe, the general recommendation is for both pharmacologic and psychotherapeutic management. Okay. And then once you've decided on the severity and the treatment approach, the next is to select the antidepressant. So when choosing antidepressants, yes, they can be the same categories, but there are also various factors to be considered, like previous treatments. Okay, if they had previous good response to an antidepressant, then you might as well continue it. If not, at least you know what not to try. A detailed assessment should precede the diagnosis or choosing the antidepressant. discussing options to the family, okay, because ultimately the family has to agree and the child has to, the adolescent has to agree on taking the appropriate the recommended treatment. Comorbid medical conditions are also taken into consideration. And we also look into the patient perceptions and preferences, as well as doing laboratory tests and discussing potential side effects and costs with the patient. And then we look also at response. So a very important thing to note is that antidepressants don't work right away. It's not like paracetamol that if you take it instantly, you'd feel better. And it's very important that patients are aware of it. It takes about 3 weeks, 1.5 to 3 weeks for the initial improvement to set in. And it takes a total of 6 to 8 weeks for the maximum effect to be seen for each dose. And now there are even researchers stating that maximum effect can be seen 2 to 3 months after or into the dose that they're giving the patient. So you can only say, or you can only define whether the patient is responding or not if you've given it enough time. All right, next. So, okay, these are the FDA-approved antidepressants for children and adolescents and the indications for them. So basically, we're limited to the first 4 in black font because those are the ones available in the country. Clomipramine, I'm not sure if it's still available, but it's an older antidepressant. We use more the newer ones, okay? And we have the escitalopram, Lexapro, we have fluoxetine, sertraline, and duloxetine for children as young as 6 years old. So it helps to also inform parents of this so that they're aware. For depression, those with approval are the escitalopram and fluoxetine. And then next slide, I just presented here the initial and maximum doses for each of the medicines. These are from the US FDA. Sometimes, you know how there's a difference between Asian and Caucasian population. So looking at their initial doses, they're not necessarily very far from the doses that we give for our adolescent population. So generally, adult and adolescent dosing is are the same, essentially the same, but it has to be much lower for children. So sometimes we go even lower for children than these doses that's in the table. All right, next. Whenever there's a discussion about antidepressant use, there's a lot of concern from parents, which is very understandable and very expected, considering that this is us medicating young children or even adolescents that we know are still having are still going through changes in their body and especially in their brain. So a lot of concerns from parents is what are the effects or side effects of the antidepressants on the developing brain. There have been some studies that point to neurobiological changes in the emotion processing areas of the brain when children are being given antidepressants, but none of those researches have been conclusive. And at this point, what we know is that there's currently little evidence to indicate that the human adolescent brain is at developmental risk from SSRIs or antidepressants. And that overall, SSRIs show clinical benefits that are judged to outweigh the risk to the neurodevelopmental and the neurodevelopment of the brain and are an important therapeutic choice in the treatment of moderate to severe adolescent depression. So at least these are things that we tell the parents when they bring up that concern. Next. Another very valid concern of parents is the black box warning. The black box warning is basically a warning in the boxes of the antidepressants that basically all antidepressants have. And it says that there's increased risk of suicidal thinking and behavior in children, adolescents, and young adults taking antidepressants. Okay. I would want to dedicate a bit of time here, a few slides here, because I think this is an important issue that all of us have to be aware so that we know how to address the concerns of the parents. Because the first thing that people read when they search antidepressants is the black box warning and the risk for suicidality. All right, next. So the FDA black box warning actually was first issued in 2004. And this was done by the FDA as a response to a meta-analysis that they conducted of over 300 randomized clinical trials of 9 antidepressants and involving nearly 100,000 participants. And this meta-analysis showed that the rate of suicidal thinking and suicidal behavior was 4% among patients assigned to receive an antidepressant, as compared with 2% among those assigned placebo. But it is of note that none of the suicide attempts were said to be fatal in those studies. Further, subsequent age stratified analysis showed that the increased risk was said to be significant only among children, adolescents under the age of 18. So these studies actually were controversial because there were a lot of methodologic issues. For one, the suicidality was not initially designed to be the target measure in those studies. Okay, or the target outcome in those studies. So, and a lot of those studies were post-marketing surveillances. And ultimately, the important point there is that the black box warning or those studies never determined any causal relationship between antidepressants and suicidality. Okay, so they were never. There was no study that causally pointed to antidepressants being the main reason for the suicidality. And it's very important because considering that you are treating depression and it takes time for the medicine to kick in, suicidality may be actually a part of the illness or the evolution of the illness, while the effect is not yet present. Okay, so in 2007, the FDA actually expanded the black box warning to state that depression itself was associated with an increased risk of suicide. So it's also a way to balance off the statement and say that, okay, it's not just because of the antidepressants, it could also be because of the depression. And again, it's pointing to the fact that there's no causal relationship that has been established. All right. Next. 10 years into the issuance of that black box warning, there was a study that was done. And what was found out was that after the first 2 years after the release of the black box warning, there was actually a drop in the diagnosis of depression. There was a drop in the prescription of antidepressants among all age groups, okay, not just for children. There was no compensatory increase in the use of other depression treatments. And there was actually a statistically significant increase in psychotropic drug poisoning, which was a measure, which was used in some studies as a measure of suicide attempt. And that the rates of completed suicide among people 10 to 34 years of age actually increased between 1999 and 2010. Okay, so before the issuance of the black box warning, it was more of suicidal thoughts and behavior, but none that was fatal. After the issuance of the black box warning, there was a speculation that more and more clinicians and patients were hesitant to take antidepressants. Clinicians had the tendency to not diagnose depression and diagnose the conditions as other conditions so that other medications may be given and avoid having to take the risk of suicidality. But it came with more, it seems to have come up with the greater problem of having actual suicidal behaviors that were detrimental or even fatal for the patients. Okay, so of course these studies are also not causal and are not able to also causally relate the black box warning with these other outcomes, but it makes us think. And basically what it tells us is that it is important to balance the risks from the benefits, considering that antidepressants also are known to be effective for the treatment of moderate to severe depression. We have to be we have to know when it has to be started, when the patient needs it, and when the patient will actually benefit from it, despite of that small risk of suicidality that we're not even completely sure is to be because of the antidepressant. Okay. All right, and of course the Hippocratic principle of primum non nocere, or the first do no harm, still applies, because to not harm the patient, we need to be able to decide well enough what is good for the patient. We're not going to harm the patient in terms of the suicidality, and we also don't want to harm the patient by depriving them of the needed treatment. Okay, so the vigilance is acceptable as long as it doesn't become detrimental to the treatment of the patient. All right, and in 20 okay, next slide. In 2014, actually, the US FDA released an article online entitled "Don't Leave Childhood Depression Untreated." And the pertinent points that they put in there are that depression and children shouldn't be left untreated. And the earlier the treatment starts, the better the outcome. And there was a clear statement that medications help patients recover sooner and more completely. So they didn't remove the black box, but at least they came up with that statement. All right. So next, after that discussion about the pharmacologic treatment, I'd just like to briefly discuss non-pharmacologic options. And as I have mentioned, combination treatment with pharmacotherapy and psychotherapy has been proven to be much more effective than either one of those two alone. So we always try to combine psychotherapy with pharmacotherapy. And then Dr. Sigua has also discussed with you digital well-being, considering that this is a digital generation. We need to teach them digital safety and digital well-being. Later on, I'll just present to you one proposal in terms of digital diet, how to make sure that you optimize your digital diet and balance it off with off internet or off technology activities. And Dr. Sigua has also talked about building resilience, and yes, that's what we really want for our children. And it takes and it's very possible to help them build resilience. All right. For the next slide, digital well-being. All right. We know, again, that being online is an integral part of their lives. And we also there have been studies that have established association between internet use and mental well-being, wherein they found out that moderate use of technology, which is around 1 to 2 hours per day, tends to be beneficial for young people's mental well-being. And the two extremes of not being online at all and excessive use can have a small negative impact on mental well-being. The 1 to 2 hours per day can be challenging, especially during this time of the pandemic and online learning, wherein at least 2 hours is already taken for the online schooling. Okay, and so in 2017, the OECD actually added or recommended that instead of focusing only on the impact, instead of focusing only on the impact of the time spent on digital technology, we should pay more attention to the influences of the content that the children encounter and the activities that they participate in online, in addition to their social and family environment. So it shouldn't just be about the hours. It should also be about the quality of their online and offline experiences. And the Children's Commissioner, next slide, the Children's Commissioner in the UK actually came up with a digital 5-a-day diet. So it basically shows the simple steps to a balanced digital diet and better well-being. So it's not just for the digital lifestyle, it also provides guide in terms of how to do these 5 components offline. So basically it says that you have to connect, meaning you can use online activities to have fun and play with friends and family, but at the same time, it's also good to connect with family offline, good to connect with friends offline, and then be active in terms of choosing activities online that gets you to be moving. So there are a lot of YouTube videos about workouts, even free apps for workout, and then additionally, you'd also want to be active offline. So finding activities that will get you occupied too without having to be using the internet. And then be creative. There are also apps that allow children to be creative, like they have those, one of them is Procreate. It's a painting, digital art app, and it's very, I think it's free, and it's very easy to navigate, and children can learn how to use it so that they know how, they get familiarized with how to do digital art. But at the same time, it will also help them to know what activities can help them be creative offline, like upcycling. Upcycling meaning you use your old used materials and turn them into something nice. So instead, not just recycling, you're actually upcycling them, or other hobbies and crafts. Giving to others can be done online by having a positive presence, reporting bad contents, and helping others also with their 5-a-day diet. Okay, or get them involved in other advocacies offline too. Okay, and then being mindful. So being mindful is knowing when to stop being online when you're already getting stressed or tired. Okay, being mindful is also knowing when to ask for help when your daily activities, even the offline ones, are already causing you a lot of difficulties. So it can be useful not just for children, but also for adults. And again, it allows us to be having a well-balanced lifestyle online and offline. So the other nice thing about this digital 5-a-day is that if you access the website of the Children's Commissioner, you actually will see a downloadable version that you can actually share with your patients and the families. It gives them these clear descriptions of each component of the 5-a-day diet. So I think it's just 7 spreads. And it's a very reader friendly. So just search digital 5-a-day Children's Commissioner. All right, next. So just to discuss the common pitfalls and challenges when it comes to the treatment or the clinical approach to depression in the adolescents. I've identified 3, okay? Diagnosis, drugs and treatment modalities, and delivery of or access to care. So very important is that we're clear about the diagnosis, because it's gonna be the basis of management as it goes with any medical condition. So you wanna be able to rule out medical conditions or substance use, especially among adolescents, and especially for first episodes. And of course, as I mentioned, you want to be able to rule out mania, previous history of mania, so that you are able to rule out bipolar disorder. Nutritional issues also need to be looked into, like again, the vitamin D level. And then drugs or treatment modalities. We understand, of course, the need to be careful when it comes to dosing children with antidepressants. It's just that you want to make sure that you're not dosing too low, because when you dose too low, then it doesn't get to be optimized, and it gets nasasayang in terms of, since the patient is already taking the medicine, nasasayang because hindi na ma-maximize the dosing. Okay, and another pitfall is not waiting enough time for the effect of the medicine. We want to be patient and remind our patients that it does take time for it to take effect. Okay, and another pitfall is not combining it with psychotherapy, because I've seen it that no matter how much medication you give, okay, if you're not able to address issues, if you're not able to build skills, if you're not able to build resilience in therapy and in the environment, then the improvement or response will not be sustained. And lastly, delivery of or access to care. There are two main factors that limits the access of patients to care. One is the access to child psychiatrists. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of us. I think there's just a little over 30 of us child psychiatrists, if I'm not mistaken. Definitely less than 100, less than 70 of us. And given the prevalence of these childhood mental disorders, we're definitely overwhelmed, and we're unable to provide care for all of these patients. Another issue is stigma. Stigma is what limits the patient's ability to seek out help from physicians, okay, to even bring it up with their primary care physicians or their family doctors. So stigma needs to be addressed. And one of the ways that stigma can be improved in our society is actually the next slide, which is shared care between family physicians and psychiatrists. So for the next slide, the shared care model actually can address both access to care and the destigmatization of psychiatric needs of our patients. So next slide. As family physicians, I was surprised when Dr. Siga told me that there's 5,000 of you in our country, and wow, that's really a lot. There's, as of 2021, there's only 600 psychiatrists, and definitely we need your help in being able to provide education and promotion of overall health that includes mental health to the patients. Primarily also because you are the gatekeepers, you're the ones that patients get to see more regularly and get to see first. It is very rare for us to see patients coming in for well visits, for coming in just because they want to take care and promote their mental health or overall health. So I see the role of one of the roles of family physicians in the promotion of overall health that includes mental wellness. Okay, and then of course, given that you see the patients more, there's role in early detection and management of psychiatric disorders. And that's why I wanted to go into that clinical approach, so that hopefully that gives you confidence in terms of managing the psychiatric disorders, at least for the depression in adolescents. And of course, there's also a role in collaborative care with mental health professionals like us psychiatrists. So the shared mental health care, the next slide, okay, is based on the increasing recognition that improving the detection, treatment, and outcomes for mental health problems requires service models that integrate the mental health care within the primary healthcare practice. shared mental health is an increasingly successful approach that attempts to address the problems of access and coordination or continuity of care. So it is really definitely helpful for the patients. Okay, and what we know to be the key to successful collaborative partnerships is one, personal contact among providers. Okay, two, treating each other with respect, our own specializations with respect, and three, taking advantage of opportunities to support each other, and lastly, sharing resources when appropriate. So I'm not aware of any formal program that exists yet that involves shared mental health care between a family physician and a psychiatrist, let alone a child psychiatrist. But I'm hoping that this is something that this is a direction that that we can head towards, because it's really helpful. And when it comes to shared mental health care, the overall goal in the next slide is to, okay, there's a lot of goals. So the overall goal is to improve the outcomes for individuals with mental health problems. And this can be achieved by developing a model of service delivery that aims to increase access to mental health services, increase the acceptability of mental health services. The fact if family physicians are able to manage mental health disorders just like any other illnesses that they're treating, then patients would see that it's no different from any other medical illness. And that's the kind of attitude that we want. We can see this, we can achieve this also by support and by supporting and enhancing the role of primary care providers in delivering mental health care, increase the understanding of the demands and needs of primary care among mental health physicians, increase the skills and comfort of primary care physicians in managing the mental health programs of their problems of their patients, integrate mental health services within the primary care settings, and strengthen links and personal contacts between sectors and providers. So it may not be institutional at an institutional level, but maybe you can start with on a personal level, like having a partner psychiatrist work with you with certain patients. Because in my level, I do have that kind of partnership with some other specializations, like other mental health professionals. And it seems, in my experience, it's very helpful to have shared mental health care for patients, because the patients get to have better access to a wide variety of treatment, and there's continuity of care too. All right. And lastly, when it comes to shared mental health care, there's not really a standard format or model for it, because it has any shared care model has to reflect the target population, the target condition, the resources available, and the structure and organization of the health services. But there are just some core ingredients that may prove helpful. So these are having a systematic approach to the engagement of primary and specialist services towards the common goal of improved mental health care. Two, having a coherent treatment model relating to the target condition and or patient population. So this has to be, you have to come up with this. And then an agreed clinical pathway and monitoring of patient outcomes, with the provision of case review by specialist personnel when needed. So it means that the specialist has to be also readily available. Next, attention to staffing requirements, because it is a service, and the provision of clinical supervision, again, to support skills development and maintenance of the treatment model. And lastly, a well-established clinical governance framework. So there has to be leadership and governance in maintaining this shared mental health care model that you're gonna, whatever that you're gonna come up with. And if we're able to come up with a shared mental health care, what we expect to be benefits are, next slide. Okay, are that patients will have increased access to care. There's decreased waiting time for services, because this is the case for a lot of us practitioners at this time. Patients have to wait just because we're also overwhelmed. There's decrease in hospitalization rates because needs are addressed earlier. There's improved clinical outcome for these patients, and there's more efficient use of resources. All right, next slide. That's the last slide, actually. And thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abel. No, I agree with you with regards to the shared mental health care. So may I request Dr. Sigua to join us now in the virtual in Zoom for the Q&A. Actually, recently, Dr. Abel, I have been seeing a lot of 11, 13-year-olds who are really having mental health problems. No? They're having anxiety, depression, and the parents just they don't know how to handle these cases. And personally, as a family physician, konti nga lang po kayong pediatric psychiatrist. It's so hard to find psych at the moment. Sobrang and sometimes they consult the adult psychiatrist, and sometimes syempre iba po yung how pediatric psychiatrists manage the patient. So anyway, we have a lot of questions here, Dr. Sigua and Dr. Bell, and both in a chat box and our Q&A. So I'll try to streamline or try to filter them out. Let's start with this question na lang. I think this is for the both of you. I think you can answer this question. No? How about adolescents with special needs, or the both of you? No? Will there be a different approach?
All right. Special needs, I'm thinking pertaining to neurodevelopmental disorders like intellectual disabilities, autism spectrum, ADHD. Yes, they do have, there is a different approach to them. And a lot of times their neurodevelopmental profile can also influence the presentation of the symptoms. So it may be different, and it takes a little bit of a different approach then in the management. So, but it's doable if we can collaborate in educating and supervising treatment. Then in the shared care model, it's possible that family care physicians can also manage children with special needs or neurodevelopmental disorders.
Yeah. Yes, because family physicians, maybe we should have a session on that, no? Because it's a entirely different group of people. Okay, so we have another question here. In patients who have antisocial behavior or behavior problems, when you think this to be an unresolved depression in the young, when patients are in the late 30s, can they still be treated or be managed?
I think it's never too late for anyone, but it's true that chronic untreated depression can lead to some personality traits or even personality disorders. Generally, the depression is easier to manage or to treat than the personality that evolves or that comes out of the years of experience. But with therapy and medication, it's still possible to treat both of them.
Dr. Helen, in terms of the family, because the parents are the ones who bring the children to the clinic. So how do you address now the frustration of the family when they are faced with a child who has a mental health concern?
The frustration?
Frustration of the parents.
Of the parents.
Yeah.
I think you have to deal, as I have discussed earlier in my lecture, you have to deal with the parents first. You have to process the parents first, because it really takes extra patience to really handle children with special needs and mental health issues. So we have to deal with the parents first, and together, no? Kasi if you have primarily problems with the parents, lalo, no, sabi ko nga, 'di ba, yung risk factors sa protective factors, they go hand in hand, no? Almost the same. So you sometimes we have to and most of the time kailangan i-handle mo separately din yung independently muna. Like you have to meet with preferably with a couple, no, kasi hindi lang yung isang single parent ang involved. So that can help. And then it's processing mainly, no, talk therapy and making them understand that it's a special challenge, at the same time an opportunity, no, to build up a different kind of relationship and success, no, that's very unique to them, no, kasi I believe na binibigay naman yan dahil kaya natin, diba? And parang parang ano din tayo, selected din tayo to deal with people or children with mental health issues, and the way that the children themselves can transcend this and be resilient, lalo na ang parents, no. So yun, it's a matter of engendering hope and counseling, coaching them also closely.
Thank you very much, Dr. Helen. We have another question here, Dr. Abel. Due to pandemic, more and more adolescents, they go online and they are now showing their sensual parts, no, to their co-players. And most of them, he said, most of them, they earn a lot of money to support family finances. Do you think this is one of the coping mechanisms of the adolescents to fight poverty or whatever they're going through, and how do you go about it?
I think that's a sad thing to be happening, especially for the welfare of our youth. But I think it's a classic example of how that shows us that youth, the adolescents, tend to have limitations in their problem-solving ability and their ability to address their need for certain gratifications. In the situation like that, I'd suppose that there's gratification in terms of finances and maybe some validation from the peer or the other person on the other side of the screen. But at the same time, if there's the finances, then I think more than the level of the child, there is a bigger issue here, the national poverty issue. It has to do also with the family being able to safeguard the digital wellness of the child. It has to do with family in terms of forming values of the child. It has to do with being able to communicate to the child or helping the child communicate his needs. Because if it's finances, what does the child feel that why does the child feel he has to be supporting the family? Okay, so if these issues are addressed at the family level, then it will be already a big help to the child. And how we go about it is, one, as parents, it's very important to educate our child, again, as what Dr. Sigo was saying about digital safety. If we have to, then we have put in place certain safeguards, limiting, there are different apps that parents can use that can limit exposure to age inappropriate materials. Okay, but more than that, we shouldn't overlook the role of communicating with the child and training them to make good choices for themselves. Of course, at their age, they're not right away ready to come up with the solutions. And that's why as parents, we have to help them see that, okay, we need money, but it's not the right way to do it. I know you want the approval of your peers, the people that you meet online, but it shouldn't be that case. Them doing that is them being abusive to you, them being taking advantage of you. So it highlights the vulnerability of this population. We really need to advocate for them.
Thank you very much, Dr. I think in relation to that also, no, there's a question: how much family secrets may be shared with adolescents, or would it be risky at some point or degree?
Secrets na For example, the child being adopted, like that?
I don't know. The question here is how much family secrets may be shared. Siguro yung mga, adult secrets or something. How much can be shared to an adolescent now? Or is it risky to share with them? Is there a time frame at some point or degree where you can share or when you cannot share?
Yeah. I get the question. I think generally, the level of openness in terms of secrets will really depend on the level of intimacy, that the family is in. Like, ano ba yung level na yung adolescent din nakakapag-share ng secrets niya, 'di ba? So siguro parents can feel it in that, play it by ear in that sense. Case to case ano na lang, no? Kasi depende rin 'yan sa sa maturity ng adolescent. So if merong level of sharing from both ends, and they think if the adolescent knows it and can, 'di ba, participatory nga yung natin yung advocate natin ngayon, no? So they can share, secrets, provided na yun nga, open ang communication. At may studies na nag-show na yung adolescents who share to their parents their secrets, is their level of adjustment and development, nakakabuti sa mental health nila. So I think it goes the same way for parents sharing family secrets. In fact, yung mga adoption secret, yung adopted siya, na i-share nga yan even sa younger years, depende sa buffer na nilalagay ng families. In some succeed, it is possible.
Thank you, Dr. Helen. We have a question here for, I think, for Robert. How long should you give antidepressants for moderate or severe depression? Do you taper when they start to improve?
So basically po, when it comes to antidepressant, there is the acute phase of treatment and there's the maintenance phase of treatment. So the acute phase is more of the stabilization, and this takes this can take up to 2 to 3 months. I've talked about how the maximum effect of medication can be achieved by 6 to 8 weeks. Sometimes though, if one medication doesn't work, you have to shift to another one or increase the dose, depending on the level of response or non-response, and that may still take several weeks. But as soon as you get to the remission phase, wherein you have no more symptoms, that's when you start the maintenance phase. The maintenance phase is a period where you maintain the dose of maintain the medication even when there's no more symptom, and it's somewhere between 6 to 9 months from the time of recovery. Some would even recommend 6 to 12 months, and it starts from the time that the child or the patient has improved, has been in remission, not counting the time that treatment was started. The dose can be tapered off a bit. But in my practice, I don't decrease it too much, because I always tell my patients it's like asphalt. The first part of treatment, we just put asphalt, okay? But we need the maintenance period to cement that effect. So if we decrease it, we might make that asphalt a little bit more vulnerable and easily crumbling. So for me, I can decrease, but not by a lot. Sometimes I maintain the same dose just because I often find myself just being able to get to a remission phase at the lowest possible dose. So anything lower than that might not be possible anymore.
Okay, Dr. Rana. So the next question here. I'd like to ask if antidepressants will take effect in 2 weeks' time or more. And while waiting for its therapeutic effect, is there any medication to give for patients with MDD along with antidepressants?
The question is, does it take 2 weeks? Does it improve in 2 weeks?
Yes. The question is in 2 weeks. So, and then, habang daw po nag-wait for the therapeutic effect, do you need to add something? Or?
Patients can start to experience improvement in as early as around 1.5 weeks. But generally, if you look at the physiology of it, the pharmacology of it, we expect it in about 3 weeks. And unfortunately, aside from providing supportive therapy, environmental support, and other non-pharmacologic medication, there's not a lot of other options to help improve the mood during the time that we're waiting for the effect of the antidepressant. So that's why it's very important when you initiate treatment with an antidepressant, you set realistic goals with the patient. You let them know and their family know that it's going to take time, but we need to be patient so that we can really identify the response by the 3rd week or 4th week. Because sometimes they get tired, and understandably so, it's difficult to be depressed, diba? But it will pay off. That's what I always tell the patient. It just takes time, but it will pay off. 2 weeks.
We have the last two questions before we end, no? So, any suggestions or advice, ma'am, or for those youth who can control their depression to handle problems in the family? Dr. Helen, you want to say something?
Yan ang kailangan ng family, family, family focused approach. Oo, kasi selective siya, sa family lang siya nahihirapan or na-express yung depression. Siguro may certain degree of dysfunction which should be discussed as a family, no, as a unit, and that can be helpful, no? Sabi nga ni Doktora, any pharmacologic treatment kung walang walang non-pharmacologic like psychotherapy with family approach ay walang magagawa. So talagang task sharing. Diba?
Okay, so in the interest of time, we have just one last question here. The question is there a program of the Philippine Psychiatry Association to do an outreach activity in rural areas, especially for patients with mental problems?
I know that we have the MHGAP program. It's mental health gap. It's a program by the Philippine Psychiatric Association to reach out to the underserved population, usually in the provinces, because they have less, they don't have enough psychiatrists there. Wherein they help train, I hope I'm right, they train rural healthcare workers or even other primary physicians in handling, in managing and diagnosing psychiatric conditions. So there is a I'm just not very sure about the detail.
Okay. So thank you very much. Yes, Dr. Helen?
We need to have a better platform with the OH kasi leverage the psychiatrists, the neurologists, the neurologists, pero tayo hindi. So, yun na nga, I'm slowly collaborating with the Department of Health Promotion kay Dr. Presi Cuevas. Actually, naging guest namin siya dun sa start. And yon, it's initiating na. we're going into it.
So thank you very much. Yes, Dr. Bell.
The mental health law actually stipulates that local government units and even private institutions should provide access to mental health care for the population. So that hopefully will be enacted and will be put into place.
It's our problem right now.
Oh.
Our problem right now really is the pandemic, no? Sorry. Yes, Dr. Helen.
Sabi ko nga, thank you, Dr. Rabel, kasi sinabi mo na it is destigmatizing in itself pagka yung mental health care nasa primary care. And ang ganda-ganda nung ingredients na sinabi mo, how we can create models of care, no, pilot cares na magiging best practices, and eventually ma-adapt na ng government natin, no? Like we can train MHOs to deliver this. We can have capacitation modules. Other than MHGAP kasi masyadong broad, no? So we have to customize it to our setting also. Kaya that's what we are gearing to. Thank you, Dr. Ara. This is really something. Ang ganda-ganda.
Yeah,
I like
I also learned a lot now from Dr. Rebel and Dr. Helen, because I'm also a family with adolescents. And it's a the digital world is a very hard. It's very hard to navigate with our children. So my kids also suffered, quote unquote, in the beginning of the online learning. So yeah, and I have seen it with my kids, and I'm sure a lot of doctors here are able to relate, especially those with young children now whose kids are into online learning. So thank you very much for specifying and then enlightening us with regards to the how to take care of our kids and how to take care of our patients who are having mental health problems. So thank you very much, Dr. Helen and Dr. Abel, for a very enlightening and a very comprehensive lecture for tonight. So at this point, I'd like to call on Mr. Daniel Lau, Junior Product Manager of Lundbeck Philippines, to give us the closing remarks.
Good evening, doctors. Thank you, Dr. Joseph. It was truly a very enriching night learning from our expert and esteemed speakers. On behalf of Lundbeck Philippines, Inc., I would like to thank each and every one of you for attending and for staying for tonight's live webinar. With our purpose of tirelessly dedicating ourselves to restoring mental health, we hope that we were able to add value to you in providing quality mental health, especially to families with young children and adolescents. Once again, we would like to express our appreciation to Dr. Cheridine Oro Joseph, Dr. Helen Santiago Sigua, and Dr. Bel Erica Nubla for sharing with us their time and expertise, and to our partner organization, the Philippine Academy of Family Physicians, for making this event possible. The e-certificates will be sent to you via email, and stay tuned for our 4th episode, which will be soon posted in the PAFP page. May you all have a great night ahead of you, and stay safe, everyone.
Your thoughts are nothing less than billions of neurons firing electrical signals every second of every day. Electrical signals that influence everything. They produce the emotions that make us tingle. They govern how we share our excitement. Even the memories we form and recall rely on the billions of connections in our brain. But all it takes is a tiny imbalance in one chemical messenger, or a single signal out of place, for thoughts to become jumbled, or for memories to disappear altogether. For us to feel our world is dimmed or slowly turning into darkness. To disconnect with our own body. Or to make us lose trust in reality altogether. While the challenge is immense, it cannot be left unsolved. Every day we work tirelessly to flick the switches on brain disease. Decades of hard work and commitment have taken us far. And while there's still a long way to go, we keep pushing forward in search of better treatments. Because one day, we hope the light will burn bright for everyone.